storms and their aftermath. With Hurricanes Harvey and Irma devastating two separate regions, there is now a new focus on climate change. So why do many in the Republican Party seem reluctant to talk about this? Let's discuss it with our own Republicans. Ben Ferguson, he's the host of The Ben Ferguson Show, and Ana Navarro is a Republican strategist. Great to see both of you. So, Ben, isn't now a good time to talk about climate change and whether or not the intensity and the succession of hurricanes that we're seeing is somehow connected to it?
I don't have a problem talking about it. I do think when people are talking about it while the hurricane is literally hitting is insensitive. I think it's trying to score political points when you should be looking at directly helping these people. And there seems to be a lot of people that say because there's a tragedy that we're watching, we see people that are suffering, there's still evacuation orders coming out. They put their political ideology ahead of the safety and the response to the people, saying we have to talk about climate change right now. No, you can wait a week to talk about it. I have no problem having the conversation about climate change. I think most conservatives don't have an issue having a conversation. But when you're trying to do it as people are in the path of the storm, when it's currently going on, this crisis is incredibly insensitive because it's about politics at that point.
Understood. But now we're past the path of the storm. So now is a good time to have this conversation, see if there's any connection?
If people want to have that conversation, that's fine. But if you ask people that have been affected by Harvey, and you ask people in Florida if right now this is something they want to sit down and have a long conversation about, or they even think the government should be focusing on. I mean, I have family members that have been dealing with flooding and ripping out literally floors and ripping out walls. They are not wanting the president or anyone in Congress right now to be having a kumbaya on global warming. They want relief efforts right now, and the government needs to focus on that.
Look, I mean, Ben, obviously you're calling it a kumbaya on global warming. Other people call it, preventing the next one or trying to lessen the next one. But I want to bring in Ana, because this is, he's reflecting exactly what Scott Pruitt, head of the EPA, says. Let me read this to you. To have any kind of focus on the cause and effect of the storm versus helping people or actually facing the effect of the storm is misplaced. All I'm saying to you is to use time and effort to address it at this point is very, very insensitive to the people in Florida. Ana, your thoughts?
Well, I am a Floridian. I am a Miamian. And if I can have a moment of personal privilege before answering about my, party pretending to be so damn dense, I want to really thank the New Day team. I want to thank my CNN family, my CNN colleagues for everything they have done for the last week to keep Floridians, to keep Americans informed. I am so grateful for people like Chris Cuomo, like John Berman, like Rosa Flores, and the people behind the cameras who have been out there in pelting rain and howling wind for hours and hours and hours. And damn, did Chris Cuomo look good doing it. I want to thank him on behalf of all the straight women and gay men of America who got to see him in that tight T-shirt, brought us at least one silver lining.
To global warming right now.
So listen, now back to global warming. Here's the bottom line. At some point, we have to have the conversation. And what we can't do, and we're talking about politicizing it during a time of a storm, but we also can't politicize it when it's not a storm. And it has become a politicized issue. And it's one that many in the Republican Party are ceding to Democrats. And we have got to be part of the conversation. There are many Republicans.
But why are they doing that, Ana? I mean, why are
Because it's become a political wedge issue. It's become, it's become one that's identified with, tree-hugging, seed-eating, brick-and-stock-wearing, do-gooder liberals.
Yeah.
And then there's, on the other side, there's folks who want to do everything opposite to that. But there's also some folks in the middle. I'm glad to hear that Ben is one of them. There's folks like, Congressman Carlos Curbelo in Miami. There's people like John McCain. There's people in the Republican Party who have been talking about climate change for a long time, who not only accept it, but say, look, forget about whether it's real or not. Let's just say this. If there is anything that we can do as Americans to make this planet a little better for ourselves and generations to come without strangling business, let's do it.
Well, here's another reason that perhaps some Republicans don't want to talk about it, and it's this pie chart that shows the amount of contributions that the coal mining industry gives to Republicans versus Democrats. They give 97% of their money to Republicans and 3% to Democrats. And so, Ben...
I mean, coal miners are smart. They understand that this political wedge issue has suffocated their industry, and that there are people that want to destroy the coal industry and don't care about the fallout of American jobs because it's so political.
Understood. And on the other side, they would say that it's time to do something about climate change because obviously so many people are suffering in Florida and Houston. So let's have the conversation and see if there's any steps that we can take.
I think there's conversation. I remember reading, and it's one of my favorite articles I've ever read, Newsweek and Time in 1974 and 75 both wrote articles saying that we were going to have massive food shortages, and the top scientists are saying we were going through global cooling. We had 5 hurricanes or tropical depressions in 75 hit Florida, 4 the very next year. Now, my point is this. There are cycles, and I think we should be able to be honest about it and say just because we had 2 storms back to back doesn't mean that it's guarantee 100% that you got to blame coal or blame this or we're not being responsible.
So you are skeptical.
I think that it's not as simplistic as some have tried to make it out to be, which is we have to blame coal and you got to shut down every coal plant and you got to shut down coal power and clean coal and everything else.
Do you believe that climate change is a phenomenon and that it's man-made?
I think that there's certainly an impact that Americans can have and the world can have on the climate. There's no doubt about it, right? And pollution. I think that's something that we should definitely talk about. But this is where it goes back to the politics. It is irresponsible. And if Democrats want to have a responsible conversation about this, then don't attack an industry and blame a sole industry for a hurricane, which is unrealistic to put all that on and say Irma happened because of coal.
If emissions are connected, why not mention that?
But my point is, if you're in the coal industry, if you're an American that works in the coal industry, do you think that you caused Irma? Do you think you caused Harvey?
But, I mean, which Democrat is saying that anybody who's a coal miner
But there is there's no area for debate with people that are climate change individuals.
Go ahead, Anna.
But look, we shouldn't be focusing on one industry, right? There's a lot of things that all of us can do. All of us can do and take some personal responsibility to decrease our carbon footprint. You know, there's things that the car companies can do and have done for fuel efficiency. There's things we can do on emissions. There's so many things. So let's not just focus on one industry. Let's focus on, you know, a comprehensive approach to this. And I would say a human approach to this. Now, I would tell you, look, part of what Ben is saying is right. As in preparation for a storm, you've got to focus on how to get your house ready, how to get yourself ready, and try not to eat the 10 pounds of candy that I did watching CNN 24 hours a day. But at the same time, when you see those satellite images of 3 hurricanes, one back to back, you know, you had this monster Irma, you had Katia, you had Jose, and just a few days before you'd had Harvey. It's hard not to think to yourself, what the hell is happening? Mother Nature is not happy with us and is sending us a message. Maybe we should listen.
Yeah, on that note, we have to wrap it up here because we do have so much news on Irma. But thank you both for having the conversation with us this morning. We appreciate that. So we're following a lot.
I want to talk a little bit about the left's perspective on the hurricane itself. So the left has been jumping to conclusions about the hurricane, looking for somebody to blame. A few years back, during Hurricane Katrina, I think it was Pat Robertson who said, actually it was John Hagee, who's an evangelical pastor, and he suggested that during Hurricane Katrina, the reason for Hurricane Katrina hitting New Orleans had to do with God being unhappy with New Orleans. There were suggestions like this after 9/11. There were suggestions like this during some hurricane seasons in the late 90s. There were religious leaders who would come out and say this sort of stuff. Jerry Falwell, I believe, said it about 9/11. This idea that God was angry, and therefore he punished particular people with the weather. He punished particular people with nature. And people on the religious side of the aisle and people on the secular side of the aisle came out and said, that's inappropriate. You don't know God's mind. Who are you to say that God is doing this because he doesn't like what's going on in New Orleans? I mean, after all, Houston seems like a relatively conservative place, and now you got the hurricane hitting this place. The secular left went nuts, right? The secular left said, how dare you attribute the sins of the people, attribute the hurricanes or the natural disasters to the sins of the people? How dare you do all those things? The truth is, the secular hard left is just as religious as some of the people on the hard right. They're just as eager to look for some cause outside of the weather to explain what just happened in Houston. And this is a tendency of the human mind, is to jump to a conclusion, these kind of just so stories about why things happen the way they do. Sometimes you feel like you can see God's hand in the universe and you feel like it's relatively clear. You know, the fact that Hitler didn't move on Dunkirk seems like a pretty clear God's hand in history moment. But when it comes to natural disasters, which are happening constantly around the world, it seems a little bit much to me to attribute those to God wanting to take revenge on particular populations. But the secular left, which hates that, is perfectly willing to ascribe the hurricane to other things. So their current god is, of course, global warming. So there's been a whole spate of articles about how global warming is what caused this hurricane. Never mind that hurricanes have actually been down in recent years. There was a hurricane gap for a while where it seemed like the number of hurricanes making landfall in the United States had dropped pretty significantly. The left said that was due to global warming. Now the left is saying that the size of this hurricane is due to global warming. Well, their suggestion is that the sort of gas fuel for hurricanes is warm water, that when hurricanes are moving over warm water, then the water evaporates more quickly, and because it evaporates more quickly, it becomes part of the vortex, and it leads to harder, longer hurricanes. The idea would be that cold water, presumably, would quash a lot of those hurricanes. So Politico has a long article today about how global warming is to blame for all of this. There are a bunch of people on the left who have been tweeting out that global warming is to blame for all of this, that it's because of all these evil oil companies in Texas that all this is happening. Cenk Uygur, who I've debated, obviously, at Politicon, he tweeted out, U.S. taxpayers should help people of Houston in light of this tragedy, but not one dime to oil companies who helped cause it in the first place. The suggestion being that oil companies drilling and providing a service to people who need oil, they are responsible for the size and the scope of this hurricane. Politico has a long article, as I say today, all about how global warming is the problem. Their article is titled, Harvey is what climate change looks like. A guy named Eric Holthouse wrote it. He says, in all of U.S. history, there's never been a storm like Hurricane Harvey. That fact is increasingly clear, even though the rains are still falling and the water levels in Houston are still rising. But there's an uncomfortable point that so far everyone is skating around. We knew this would happen decades ago. We knew this would happen. We didn't care. Now is the time to say it as loudly as possible. Harvey is what climate change looks like. Well, not really. I mean, not really. So they say that Houston has been sprawled out into the swamp for decades, largely unplanned and unzoned. Now that pavement has been transformed. It has transformed the bayous into surging torrents and shunted Harvey's floodwaters towards homes and businesses. So these all might have seemed like a good idea at the time, but it was a bad idea. What does that have to do with global warming? Nothing. It has to do instead with urban planning.